Welcome to GothCast, episode 8. I am Dr. Sanders.
And I'm Robbie Gore.
Today we're going to be talking about Siouxsie and the Banshees.
Yep. Yet another prolific gothic band.
Yeah, Siouxsie and the Banshees, it's basically, The Cure are like the male Siouxsie and the Banshees.
Pretty
and
much.
Siouxsie and the Banshees are basically the female Cure. That's how a lot of people see it.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of differences, though, but there are obviously a ton of similarities, and there are some crossovers in terms of members.
Yeah, definitely that.
I could see the argument for this or for that, but there are a lot of differences in terms of their sound, and we'll go through that as we're explaining the albums.
Yeah.
Yeah, this band was very, very, very influenced by punk early on, and then, you know, with albums like Juju and Hyena, went on to be, you know, obviously what they are known for most today, which is very melodic, very dark, spooky, kind of gothic songs.
Yep.
And, you know, songs like Kiss Them For Me and things like that. So they went on to bend a lot of genres, and we're going to be talking about their first 4 albums.
So we're kind of going to start with their beginnings in kind of punk rock history.
Yeah.
And really just kind of start to bring it into the realm of gothic rock.
Exactly. So we're going to cover everything from the Scream to Juju.
Yep.
Getting right into Scream, or if you want to do any kind of prehistory for us.
Okay, so a brief little history on Siouxsie and the Banshees. Siouxsie Sioux and Steven Severon met at a Roxy Music concert in 1975.
Good band.
Both very into the Sex Pistols. So they're kind of following the Sex Pistols around shows and stuff, and very into that scene at the time because they'd pretty much been disillusioned by 70s rock.
Yeah.
As had many people, which is kind of why we have punk and post-punk and goth and all these genres that were spawned by the punk genre.
Yeah.
But they ended up landing a gig because the manager of the Sex Pistols had put on a music festival and one of the bands backed out last minute. So they kind of recruited a band really last minute to just play the gig, which obviously had Siouxsie and Steven in it, but also had Marco Peroni on guitars and John Simon Ritchie on drums. And for those of you who don't know, John Simon Ritchie is Sid Vicious from the Sex Pistols.
A lot of people don't know that Sid Vicious played with Siouxsie and the Banshees. So he played drums.
Yep, very first gig.
And you can actually hear that recording online.
Yep.
It's very, very, very fuzzy. I'm just telling you right at the bat before you go look for it. It's extremely hard to hear what's happening. It's very strange to know that Sid Vicious was actually in Siouxsie and the Banshees.
Yeah, well, later we'll see some Steve Jones action there, too.
Yeah. I'm not getting to that right now. But, yeah, that's why I want to wear my Sid Vicious t-shirt. I have a Sex Pistols Sid Vicious t-shirt. Everyone says, like, oh, man, are you, like, really into the punk and Sex Pistols? I'm like, no. I like when he was in Siouxsie and the Banshees. Everyone just looks really confused when I say that, but I always think it's really funny.
Yeah, we should get a t-shirt made that says Sid Vicious and that says Siouxsie and the Banshees underneath.
Ah, that's a good idea.
That'd be good.
We should do that.
Yeah.
And Steve Jones. But then we'll get that later. So.
Yeah. After that gig, they had actually split up. But 2 months later, they were asked to play again, so they kind of reformed the band, and they continued to tour at that point and just kind of play random clubs, festivals, things like that. And so they kind of gained this underground following around the band, but they couldn't find a record deal that would give them the control that they really wanted. And so at that point, they hadn't really released a record, although they had played like a ton of shows. So they end up landing a record deal with the record label Polydor, and because of that, we have the album Scream. And
yeah.
So why don't we just get right into Scream, Donnie?
Okay, Scream says 1978. Scream is released. Now, if you're only familiar with songs like Spellbound and Christine and Kiss Them For Me, or even Face to Face, this is going to be
a shocker.
Yeah, really, really, really different kind of sound. And for the first 2 albums, they had a very, think about it. They were called post-punk at the time.
Yeah, but I refute that statement.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think they should just be called punk, at least for those 2 albums. Kaleidoscope, I understand the post-punk label.
Yeah, because it's more melodic and things like that. Yeah, it does kind of just have that sort of punk sound to this, especially the Scream. This is a very, very, very abrasive album.
It feels like a Runaways record to me, honestly.
Yeah, in a way.
Yeah.
It kind of does. It feels like a lot of stuff from around that time. It does have its own distinct kind of Siouxsie-ism, to it, especially with her voice. That's really the distinct thing about this album is her voice on it, which doesn't really sound like a lot of punk singers. It does, of course, kind of hint towards the Runaways and even sort of that kind of overly glam kind of thing,
Yeah.
Kind of like howling.
It's definitely not the Siouxsie Sioux voice that we'll hear on later albums.
No, it is not.
Yeah.
In fact, not much a melody in her voice in this one.
No, not really. In fact, everything is kind of just shouted on the album.
I wish I could say I knew a lot of people who like this album because I met people who like Three Imaginary Boys by The Cure, right?
Yeah.
That's going to be what this is compared to a lot of the time, and it actually is what it's compared to a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
This and Join Hands.
Yeah.
Cure had the same thing where the first album is really, really different than what came after, right? And it kind of started this trilogy of albums.
Siouxsie and the Banshees kind of have these first two albums that are really different from the rest of the material.
This is a really, really abrasive sound. It's not mixed in a very full way. There's not a whole bunch of like overdubs or things like that.
It almost kind of just sounds like a really well mixed live concert.
Yeah. Apparently they recorded it in a week.
Yeah.
Which I think is nuts. And it took like a month or 3 weeks to actually mix it.
Not even a month, 3 weeks.
3 weeks to mix it, yeah. So this is an extremely, extremely quick turnaround time for any band.
Yeah.
It does have that extremely raw feeling to it. And even when it's remastered, like there's the remastered versions that are everywhere now. In fact, it's pretty hard to find a version that isn't remastered unless you actually buy the vinyl record now.
Yeah.
But it still has a very strange EQing for each song. And by that,
I agree.
Yeah, by that I mean that there's a lot of really quiet build-ups and a lot of things like that on the album. And it's just a strange one. Even the opening track, which is just pretty much noise.
Yeah.
They were already doing some different things.
Yeah.
Like this wasn't just straightforward pop. I was gonna say pop punk. This isn't. Not quite pop punk.
Yeah. Not quite reached that decade.
Yeah. So, yeah, we're gonna encounter that later. But so this isn't just straightforward punk. And, they were trying to do a little bit of experimenting.
No, they definitely are. And so I'll give them a little bit of defense on the post-punk labeling because they are trying some different things, some experimenting. Some
kind of soundscapey sort of things.
It's not your straightforward plug-and-play, hit-record punk record.
Yeah, but it does very much resemble those kind of records.
Yes.
And the way that the guitars are done. And
I think the guitars are probably what resembles punk the most on this album.
Yeah, in fact, I would say that's what resembles the least towards their future albums.
Yeah,
but then I think they had different guitars for this one than they did for the rest of their albums.
Mixing's very dry for this album.
Oh yeah, extremely. In fact, if you guys don't know what that means, when we say it's dry, that means it's not like a full dynamic sound, like one of those songs that bursts out of your radio,
Yeah, or if for those of you who are more technical, there's not a lot of reverb on this album. There's not a lot of delay, not a lot of compression, not a lot of chorus or doubling or any of these other effects that we commonly see on albums. It's just a very straightforward, simple, raw, natural sound.
It does work for this album, but it's, I gotta say, I'm not the biggest fan of this album, honestly.
I would have to agree with you. It's just, I feel like as a big Siouxsie and the Banshees fan, I can't really say that I love these first two records.
Yeah.
They're not bad records, and if maybe any other band had released them, I might like them a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I just expect so much more from Siouxsie and the Banshees because I feel like just because it wasn't what I was initially exposed to.
Yeah. I do think that a lot of people can find songs to love here, though.
There are some good songs on the record.
And keep in mind, this is not... Like, we're not saying this album isn't good. But it's a very much a Three Imaginary Boys kind of issue that we're having with it, where because we know what's going to come after these albums, this one doesn't hold up to those ones.
I will say, though, I feel like there's a more clear image and idea behind these albums than there was behind Three Imaginary Boys.
Oh, I totally agree, actually.
And that's where I will give this album a lot of credit, is although this is not the sound that they will pursue in the future, they definitely have a distinct idea and they're going for it, and they're representing it well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think the most popular song on this album, at least from what I can find, is actually Carcass, which is kind of strange because it wasn't really released as a single or anything like that. So
I do kind of agree that I think it's one of the better songs on the album.
Yeah. My favorite songs on the album, I'll just list them off here. So it's Carcass, Mirage. I really like Switch.
Switch is really good.
Yeah,
my favorites are Switch, Suburban Release. I actually really like the Helter Skelter cover. I know a lot of people don't, but I kind of like it.
I just have never really liked that song that much.
I could see that.
Yeah, in fact, I think my favorite version is probably like, oh god, who's that band? The like Motley Crue or something. Like I think they covered it
really
or something.
You like the Motley Crue version over this?
It's not. Maybe it's not them. Who is it? I think it's like, or maybe Rolling Stones or. I forget who did it. Somebody like that
it's
did.
Not the Stones.
No, somebody else did a cover of it, and it was really good. But I don't really like this version.
Fair enough. I appreciate it because I was listening to the track when I first heard it, and I wasn't really paying attention to the lyrics. I was like, "This is kind of a cool song," and then I started listening to it, and I was like, "Wait a minute." This is Helter Skelter.
That's the thing about it, is it's not a straightforward cover at all, so it's really hard to recognize it. You almost could have called it something else. I mean, if they just put different lyrics to it.
But yeah, I think that really those are the tracks that stand out for me, and the rest of the album, from my own personal taste, is just a little too abrasive for me to enjoy as a Siouxsie and the Banshees album.
Yeah. I don't think the abrasiveness necessarily detracts from this album. I really don't. I get that as a Siouxsie and the Banshees album it does. My problem with it is that, to me, it just sounds kind of, I'm trying to use the word here, repetitive or samey kind of sounding.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those records where you throw it on and 3 songs into it, you're like, did this song change?
Yeah, it is kind of one of those albums. And
I hate saying that because
I do too.
I love Siouxsie and the Banshees.
Yeah, I really think that this could just been a stronger album.
Yeah.
But man, as a good, especially for the time, it's 1978 is when this one's released. And a lot of people forget that. Like I said when we did The Cure Part 1, is 1979 was The Cure's first album. 1978 is Siouxsie and the Banshees' first album.
Well, and Siouxsie and the Banshees was kind of formed out of a love for the Sex Pistols, so naturally you would expect a more abrasive sound initially.
Yeah, and if you even see photos of her from around this time, they're combining glam and punk and all these different like kind of images and looks. And then of course they would eventually go to a little bit darker, which is what most people prefer. One of the things I want to mention about this album was the song Overground.
Yeah. Do you want to tell them that one, Donnie?
Yeah, okay, well. So Overground is, I think it was the first single, or it was basically one of the songs that was more popular off this album.
Which is not, in my opinion, very good.
No, I mean, it's an okay song. It's not my favorite. It definitely is not on this album, and it's not even one of my top songs on this album. Like I said, I already listed it. It's like Carcass, Mirage, and Switch. So this is actually re-recorded inside 1984 for the Thorn EP, with the kind of more like 80s sound, the more kind of like...
it actually sounds like what you want out of this song, knowing that it was recorded by Siouxsie and the Banshees.
Yeah, it sounds more like the Hyena years.
Yep.
And that's what I really like about it. So if you guys have a chance, and you guys haven't heard it, listen to the version of Overground from the Thorn EP, because I like that one a lot.
That's actually a really good song, and that just goes to show you how production can change a song, production and composition alone.
Exactly.
Like, that was a song that I really didn't care for on the album, but hearing that version was like, oh my god, this song is great. Like,
yeah, exactly. So if you kind of want to see it from a different perspective, take a listen to it. Like I said, I think fans of, they're more popular. Like, say, okay, here, I'll put it this way. If you have a best of Siouxsie and the Banshees CD, like that's your go-to Siouxsie and the Banshees,
probably not going to like this version.
You're probably not going to like this album. If you are really tired of listening to, I mean, not that you ever would be tired of listening to any of their albums.
Juju or
Superstition or anything like that. If you have heard them so many times that you're just like, oh, I want to hear maybe something else from them, and you haven't really strayed outside of those like really poppy albums, I would say The Scream is something that will like shake your foundation of what you think about this band. So it's not my favorite start, not my favorite first album by them, just because I tend to like so many more of their other albums.
Yeah.
And it's really hard for me to disconnect it. And even outside of that, being Siouxsie and the Banshees, you know how we did Three Magic Boys? I can see that Three Magic Boys is a pretty good album for what it is, right?
Yeah.
The Scream, still, outside of that, it just sounds kind of generic to me, unfortunately. And I do like the album. I like a few of the songs on it. But overall, this album just doesn't do it for me, unfortunately.
Yeah, I do and don't agree with you on that statement. I agree that it's similar to Three Imaginary Boys in that it just doesn't do it for me. But I kind of almost like Three Imaginary Boys less just because I feel like that record lacks a lot of consistency. And perhaps this record has too much consistency, but at least they knew what they were going for.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to commend that. I look forward to, as we talk about the later releases.
Yeah. So, that's Scream. I would actually really like to hear our listeners' opinion on this one.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, I mean, we tend to find the best in every album, right? From our certain perspective, and we really try to. You know, even when Christian Death, you know, the first album and second album, it's totally different album.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have very varied I love saying that. Very varied opinions on it.
Very different.
Yeah, very different opinions on those two albums because they are so different. So most people will just listen to the first one or prefer Catastrophe Ballet and they don't really like Only Theater of Pain.
Yeah.
And just like with The Cure, we said a lot of people like the Gothic Trilogy, or sometimes they prefer Three Imaginary Boys over that, or they prefer Head on the Door over the Gothic Trilogy. So this is maybe one of those cases where maybe it's just not connecting with me or you, and I want to see if some people have a different idea of what this album represents for their part of their career, or maybe what it represents in terms of, you know, just an album.
Yeah. No, it'd be nice to have some outside perspective. Sometimes it gets hard to really see things objectively when you start reviewing albums because you already have your preconceptions from bands that you like.
Yeah.
And then when you try and look at them objectively, you do it because you're trying to do it for the sake of being professional.
Yeah.
But it's impossible to leave behind all prejudices.
Yeah. Oh, and then one more thing I just want to mention on the tail end of here is that Hong Kong Garden, which was a lot of people will associate with this album, is not actually on this album.
Not originally, anyways.
Yeah, so it's like we said with Bauhaus and the Cure's albums.
Yeah.
Is that a lot of times these albums are re-released with the non-album singles.
Yep.
Which is very common with Bauhaus and, you know, like Dark Entries and things like that. And especially with the Cure, in fact, they mix with their lineups. If you buy any CD in America, sometimes they have like really screwed up track listings.
Yeah.
But for this one, the Scream is often bundled with Hong Kong Garden. That's not actually on this album. It is a good song, released the same year.
Yep.
But it's not on this album.
No, it's a single.
If you want to know my opinion on that one, I think it's a great song. I like that song. It's very unique. I actually like how poppy it is.
I do too. I kind of wish that it was part of this record, or that it influenced this record more.
I was gonna say that. Yeah, I would have preferred if maybe there was because actually when they do repackage it with it, if you hear it, because most versions have that, it sounds way out of place.
Yeah.
Just because it is a very distinct song apart from this whole album.
Yeah.
So that's my opinion of Scream. Take a listen for yourself.
I wholeheartedly agree.
Okay, so this is our new segment for this episode. Now, I don't even know how to start off this.
ABC.
Okay, so
we can't really even blame ABC for this because it wasn't their choice. They aired it, but
I don't know what to think about this. Okay, I'll preface this by saying we know that there's a lot of controversial things in the goth community about Marilyn Manson, right?
Yeah.
And you know, a lot of people don't consider him goth. A lot of people will consider maybe Antichrist Superstar, maybe like Mechanical Animals or Portrait of American Family goth, and nothing else goth.
If anything, I think people tend to agree more that he's industrial rock more than he is goth.
Yeah, so
but people of the gothic scene still tend to appreciate industrial music.
Yeah, and a lot of people find him like a guilty pleasure.
Yeah.
I find that is much, much more common.
Yeah.
Like, he's not goth, but I like his music, and maybe not necessarily as much anymore, but that's a whole different topic. Okay, I just wanted to get my Marilyn Manson safety warning out there that I know a lot of people have extremely strong opinions about him in the subculture, and we would normally want to wait until we actually did an episode where we talked about Marilyn Manson and his effect on gothic culture and his place in it and where he might fit in, but this news that we're going to tell you is so weird that I just had to make it a news topic.
Yeah. So Dancing with the Stars featured a dance routine to Marilyn Manson.
Yeah, they did a dubstep influenced remix of The Beautiful People.
Yep.
With the people in colored contacts and dark clothing and
Yep.
And I think
they were all vamped out.
Yeah, the guy had like fangs and stuff, and it's supposed to be like all creepy and
very industrial, mechanical kind of dancing and movement.
It does not work for me. I mean, man,
Yeah.
it just looked really, really clumsy. I mean, you go to goth clubs and stuff, and you're dancing the songs, and it looks really right. You know, like everyone there was like really feeling the music and getting into it.
If you ever seen South Park, it's pretty good representation.
You know, so, you know, surprisingly, it actually kind of is in a weird way. If you guys have ever been like any kind of goth club, it kind of is like that at points where everyone's just moving side to side and kind
a little nod,
kind of swaying.
Light the cigarette.
You don't even need to light the cigarette. There's usually a fog machine on, but yeah. So it's usually that kind of music makes you want to dance that way, right? You know, just kind of like sway around and kind of like get really into it
and sway.
Yeah, and this is like classical dancing infused with like this new type of dancing, and
it's a highly choreographed routine
to Marilyn Manson.
Yeah,
and I just don't get it. Like, I've never really understood Dancing with Stars. I'm sorry if you're a fan of it and you watch our show, but I just have never really gotten that program. I guess I don't really watch that much TV either. I'm more like a movie watcher, but so I've never understood it anyway. And I understand like musicals and stuff, like actually dancing to music from musicals. Yeah. That makes perfect sense to me because it's written for that. It's written for a routine.
Yeah.
This is a song that literally I've seen Marilyn Manson play. Like, this is the video of him playing it, and Gingerfish doesn't start the drums right on time, so he starts throwing stuff at him, and he's wearing like, and Marilyn Manson's wearing like the medical thing, and he's like has like he's all sweaty and gross. His makeup's like pouring down. And he's like it's so rock and roll. And he's bleeding all over the place later in the set. And you take that and you put it onto Dancing with the Stars, that song that's supposed to represent all this creepy stuff to a lot of people.
And it's on a Disney-owned network.
It's just so weird.
Yeah.
And I just don't know how I feel about that. You know, I don't really have strong opinions about the mainstream kind of picking up on goth stuff. Like,
I kind of do when it's Disney, to be honest with you.
Well, you know, like I said, when we did Hotel Transylvania, when we talked about that movie,
but it's not Disney.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I guess. But you know, like, I was okay with that, right? It's a very mainstream thing, having very gothic kind of tendencies to it. Some of the characters, right? And I'm okay with it. You know, like, there's even like beach goth, right? There's if you live in Orange County, it's like beach goth is this thing. It just happened.
Yep.
Is the fourth one.
It's last weekend.
I'm not talking about it. Okay, that's it. That's all I'm gonna say about beach goth. We could address that later, but you know, this was just so out of place. I think, you know, because of the whole vampire thing.
Yeah, I definitely think it's because of the saturation of vampire movies and television shows that are on right now.
Yeah, and then they pick a song with like, well, what's a popular song that like kids who are into vampires might like, and so they probably picked Marilyn Manson, going, oh, you know, that's probably it. And
you know what us talking about this reminds me of?
What?
The South Park episode where the vampire kids moved to town.
Oh God! Damn it! It's kind of true. Yeah. Okay.
So basically, watch South Park.
God, I really don't want to try and be that like guy, but I totally am that guy where I'm just like, this isn't like. Like, I just don't know. Like, you can take a look for it yourself.
We're not vampires.
We're not vampires. We're goths. This was just such a weird thing. I don't get it. And I guess, you know, Halloween is coming up.
Yeah.
At the time we're recording this, is the day before Halloween.
Yeah, this will come out post Halloween.
Yeah. So I get that they're trying to do that. You know, you could do so many different songs that are horror themed that would be better to dance to for a routine, right?
Yeah.
I don't feel like Marilyn Manson's music is good to dance to a routine anyway. And you take this extremely choreographed show and then put this extremely hard song in there. I don't get it.
I mean, they could have done something like "I Put a Spell on You," and that would have worked. Like,
I mean, a ton of. They could do the Monster Mash. I mean, even the Misfits did a version of Monster Mash. I mean, hell, Vincent Price version of the Monster Mash, by the way, is the best. Oh, love Vincent Price. I can always bring up Vincent Price, no matter what it is. But yeah, that was just a weird thing, and it totally blew my mind. That's why I just can't even comprehend that really happened. That somebody who was so counterculture, like to everything, was like, oh man, it was blamed for Columbine and all that stuff. You know, back in the day, it was blamed for, and it's like they put on ABC to dance to.
Yeah, but I mean, I almost kind of feel like he probably had to agree to have that song.
Oh, probably because he
played
wrote
on
it
there, and that kind of shows you kind of where Marilyn Manson's gone. I mean, he sells his own absinthe. I feel like a product more than anything else at this point.
That's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not gonna confirm or deny my feelings on that one at this moment, but yeah, that's just weird. So I just thought that was like the most appropriate news that I could possibly put into this episode.
So this has been Gothic News.
That's it. So I hope you guys all had a good Halloween, I guess. It's weird talking like in the future tense.
Yeah, it is. It is.
So this has been Gothic News.
Hopefully we have a good Halloween.
I think, yeah, I know. I hope we had a good Halloween too. I think we did. So yeah, this was Gothic News. Yeah, that's a weird one. In fact, that's pretty much the top story. And then Robert saw Crimson Peak. I haven't seen it yet, but so we're not gonna talk about it yet. Don't talk about it.
Yeah.
So don't spoil it for me.
We'll wait to talk about that one.
Yeah. And of course, if you guys have any Gothic news that you want us to feature on the show, just email us or message us on Facebook or gothcastradio.com or anything like that. Let's get back to talking about Siouxsie and the Banshees.
All right.
Because my mind is so blown.
Let's do it.
Okay, so on to Join Hands.
Yep. So this is the last album that has the original lineup for Siouxsie and the Banshees.
Yeah, so it's released 1 year later. You know, we've said many times on this show, most of these albums for these bands, at least these earlier bands, you know, Bauhaus and The Cure and everything, they're usually released yearly.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times they're very similar because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Not in The Cure's case sometimes, but with this one, that really is the case.
Yeah, it really is.
So it's basically, the way I view it,
It feels like The Scream Part 2.
yeah, I didn't want to say it, but yeah, you can. So a lot of this is the same. So most of what we said with The Scream pertains to this album.
Yeah.
The way I view it is almost in a negative way, just because, you know, it's the next album. It's album 2.
Yeah.
And a lot of those kinks, I feel like in songwriting or in structure or the repetitiveness, I just feel like should have been
addressed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, I mean, Three Imaginary Boys happened. You know, it has its fans. And the next album that comes after is 17 Seconds. It's a good album. It's a direction towards The Cure. And I just don't feel like this is forward movement for Siouxsie and the Banshees.
Well, here's the thing. And it's maybe one of the reasons why I think they probably didn't stray too far. So one is a time constraint, so a year, right?
Yeah.
And then The Scream was pretty successful when it came out. You know, it was a very well-received album. And so I'm not surprised that they would go with something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, today in 2015, when we're talking about these albums, you know, The Scream you would listen to because you're like, wow, this is Siouxsie and the Banshees' first album. Like, oh my gosh, look at how crazy and abrasive this is and how raw it is. With Join Hands, I just don't feel it as much because there's not as much mystery or intrigue about it because it's their second album.
Yeah.
Kind of sounds the same.
There's a couple of standout songs for me on this album. I don't really want to get to that yet. This album's disappointing for me.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it was already done. And I know this is not necessarily possible because back then you signed contracts which you had to do yearly releases for and things like that. I don't know if that was the case for this album, but it may have been.
Yeah.
But I would have rather them have taken that year off and produced a better album.
Ooh, that's bad. That's a bad thing to say.
I know it's a blow, but I feel
it's a difference between. There's a big difference between saying, you know, this album kind of sounds the same as the first one, and saying, I wish this album didn't exist.
I'm just saying, there's so much great material that comes from Siouxsie and the Banshees right after this album.
Yeah.
So that clearly they're capable of it.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of holding them to that standard a little bit.
I can see your argument on that. I think maybe it might have been the members at this time. I don't know. I think there was just so many influencing factors. You know, punk was still fresh, you know? I mean, to some extent, you know, it's still the 70s. Hasn't yet crossed over in the 80s. And
I mean, the Sex Pistols are dead, but, you know.
Well, yeah.
What's new?
Yeah, exactly. But that stuff's definitely still the remnants of that. And releasing a successful album and then following it up with an album that sounds similar in a time when those kind of albums, very abrasive albums, very stripped back kind of albums can be very popular, I can see why they would do this.
Yeah.
I just think, yeah, I mean, you never hear anybody talk about this album, ever. I don't think, I mean, I hear people talk about The Scream every once in a while.
Yeah.
You know, they may have heard it. I never hear anyone say it's their favorite Siouxsie and the Banshees album.
But it's at least talked about, and when it came out, it got great reviews from critics.
Yeah, but then I never hear anyone talk about Join Hands, unfortunately.
Yeah, Join Hands really does seem to be the black sheep album for Siouxsie and the Banshees.
Yeah, I mean, there are some... Yeah, we'll get to some of the other ones later. But as far as early on, this was definitely the strangest kind of choice for them. Yeah. At least in a retrospective way. At the time, that makes total sense. Like I said, successful album, followed by similar sounding, successful album. I mean, this album wasn't lambasted by critics, you know? It was...
No, it wasn't.
It's just
you want to say that it could have been a better album.
Yeah.
But maybe it couldn't have because of the time and what was going on and the members of the band and what was popular.
Yeah. Like we said just a moment ago when we were talking about Scream, Hong Kong Garden was released.
Yeah.
And you still don't really have that kind of sound on this album. Actually, some of the singles that were released for, you know, their non-album singles were actually pretty good, you know, outside of what they were doing. So there was only one single released from this album, and it's Playground Twist, right? And it has a video and everything, and it just doesn't have that same energy or impact that a lot of the other stuff does.
No, it just unfortunately doesn't. But what I will say I like about this album is that we are starting to see some more production involved in the albums.
Yeah.
So we're seeing double track vocals, we're seeing chorus and phasers on guitars on a couple songs, and I'll just go ahead and get into what my two favorite songs on the album are.
Okay.
Which are Mother, Oh Mine Papa.
It's a really creepy song.
Yeah.
I like how creepy that is. Like that kind of like ambient, like kind of crazy noise. I do like that.
It's actually a German like children's song.
Oh, it is?
They covered, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
That explains a lot.
I like that a lot, and I like the Lord's Prayer because I feel like that sets the stage for the kind of experimental route that they're going to go immediately after this album.
Yeah.
And for me, that's a real push towards the direction that I want to see Siouxsie and the Banshees head towards.
Yeah.
And for most of the record, I'm listening, and I'm waiting to get to something that I feel like sounds like Siouxsie and the Banshees, and that to me is starting to kind of get there. Okay,
yeah, I agree with the Mother, Oh My Papa song. I love that song.
Yeah.
It's just really, really creepy. It sticks out like a sore thumb here.
Oh,
where you're just like, whoa,
does.
like, you know, it's pretty abrasive for most of it, and then gets to that song. But then my other favorite song, and I feel like it's kind of a hint as to what we're going to see, and it's the song Icon. And kind of has that like slightly bigger vocals than they were doing, and kind of catchy, and I like it.
I do think we see a sliver of what Siouxsie's voice is going to sound like on the next album.
Yeah.
Just a hint.
Yeah.
It's not enough to really give you an idea or for you to really expect what's coming next.
Yeah.
But what's coming next is really good.
Yeah, so that's pretty much Join Hands. I mean,
there's not a lot to say about Join Hands, unfortunately.
Yeah. If this is your favorite album,
we apologize.
Yeah, please. I'm so sorry. Not that you like it, not just the fact that we didn't appreciate it the same way.
We apologize that we're trashing your favorite album right now.
Yeah. Like I said, Scream, you can go back and listen to it because it's definitely a curiosity.
Yeah.
Like, piques your curiosity. But this one, it sounds similar. It does a little bit different, but it's just not as much of a draw for me.
Yeah. It doesn't have the novelty of the first album, and it doesn't have the inspiration of the following album.
Yeah. So that's Join Hands. That's my opinion.
Yeah, it's my opinion too. I'm sorry if you like this album. It's just our opinions.
Yeah. onto Kaleidoscope.
Yes, so it's 1980.
So, like I said, every year release an album. That is so nuts to think now that you have every year a band will release a full album. This is nuts. And plus non-album singles.
Yeah, I know.
So
back when bands worked.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. This is really where I feel Siouxsie and the Banshees start to become what we know today.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note the history behind that. So for this album, again, it's the same record label, but we have the arrival of two new musicians. Got Budgie on drums and John McGeoch on guitars. And Siouxsie even comments herself, just adding or changing those members, it was a completely different band after that.
Well, Budgie definitely gives it that driving rhythm that everyone really, really knows them for.
Yeah.
And it's just so distinct. You know, she would go on to work with him, and then they also start a relationship and everything.
Yep.
So there's a lot to adding these people to this band. And it's a totally, totally different album than anything that had become before it.
No, it's so different that it's funny. There's a quote from Robert Smith where he says that this album sounds a lot like Head on the Door.
Yeah, oh yeah, where he
which I
compares
think
it.
is funny because this album came first.
Yeah. Well, if you listen to it, it's actually, I mean, a lot of comparisons can be drawn for it.
I
mean,
know, but the way he states the quote, it makes it sound like...
Oh, was it influenced
Yeah.
by it? Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I don't know. We probably have to hear the interview, probably.
Yeah, it's probably taken out of context. I just thought it was a really funny quote.
Yeah. Well, for this one, you have so many good songs. It's not a perfect album.
No, it's not at all, but it's a step in the direction that we really want to see for Siouxsie and the Banshees. We see a lot of experimentation on this album. We have drum machines, we have synths, lots of chorus on guitars.
Yeah.
Definitely the double-track vocal sound. We really have Siouxsie coming into her own with her voice, really developing what her voice is going to be for the later albums.
It's a lot less classic rock / punk inspired.
Yeah.
People still call this a post-punk album.
Yeah.
It definitely is moving more into that gothic rock sort of pop arena with these songs.
This is where you probably call it proto-goth.
Kind of, yeah. But also the inclusion of like the electronic drums and everything and all the other instruments, you know, saxophones and keyboards and all that sort of stuff gives this a super, super full sound. And I just love it. I really like this album.
No, this is actually... I mean, we'll get to Juju eventually. Yeah. But I really do love this album.
Yeah, and it's a total classic to me. I can almost list... Here's what I'll do. I'll list the songs I don't like about this album instead of listing songs I do like, because I like so many songs on this album. In fact, the only songs I don't like on this album, and when I say I don't like them, it means that I'm not as big a fan of them as I am the other ones, is the last 3 songs on this album. Even Desert Kisses to some extent. So it's Desert Kisses, Red Light, Paradise Place, and Skin. Now, I don't think they're bad songs. Yeah. I just think that the first part of the album is so strong that these songs kind of don't get me as into it or don't really close out the album as well.
I agree with you with the exception of Red Light. I really actually like that song a lot.
I don't know how you like that song.
I just think it's really interesting. It was something very different for them to do, and like I can't even think of something else that came out at the same time that sounds remotely like that.
That's not the point. I mean, at least not for me. I mean, even if stuff, Lou Reed's Heavy Metal Machine, what about that? And then they'll sound like that, huh?
Are we really gonna compare that to Lou Reed's Heavy Metal Machine?
Maybe.
It's not that bad, Donnie.
No, it's actually a pretty good song, but I'm just not a big fan of that one, and it's mostly just because every other song on this album is so good. So Happy House, of course, is one of their biggest singles, right? So you have 2 of the biggest singles they've ever released, or at least in today's world, you know, where the popularity of these songs is. So Happy House and Christine.
Yeah, I mean, everybody loves Christine, but I actually think that that's a single that holds merit. I think it's a really solid song. Yeah,
and people love that song and Happy House, and they will sing them all the time, and they always put them on like mixed CDs. They even play them at clubs and everything. Like, go out and dance, and they, you know, will remix it and speed it up and all that stuff.
I think my favorite song on the record is Hybrid.
I love that song. In fact, okay, so Happy House, Tenet, Trophy, Hybrid, Clockface, Lunar Camel, Christine.
Everything besides the last
4. Like that whole thing, it just goes so well together. Like I just really, really, really like the sound that they got out of this album, and I like that they were using acoustic guitars. They weren't afraid to kind of experiment with not only a sparse sound that they had earlier, but to have this really full experimental echoey kind of stuff. It was just, it's a blend of not only what they were doing, but like what was popular, what would be popular, and just kind of their own thing. I mean, it's almost like the synthesizer and stuff for Happy House and all that stuff. It sounds so modern for today.
Well, that's almost okay, and I'll briefly defend Red Light again. Just quickly to say that I feel like part of the reason that I like that song is because I feel like it kind of holds up as a modern song. I could see that song being released today.
Really?
I do.
Okay, I'll agree with you. And
you don't have to, Donnie.
I don't agree with you. We also have some weird songs on here. Of course, Clock Face is a pretty strange song. Lunar Camels is a strange song. In fact, I think that same kind of concept for Lunar Camels will be done better on Hyena. And when we get to that album, I'll actually explain why and how I think it's similar to a specific song on there.
Yeah.
Because when we get to Hyena, man, all I'm going to do is gush.
Dr. Sanders over here he's just going to spread his heart all over that record.
I love Hyena. I was going to say, that's like, oh man, when we get to that one, that's like my favorite album. But I think that this is such a good album. It's hard to describe, or at least put into perspective, that this album came out in 1980. Now, so many landmark albums came out this year. So, In the Factory came out in 1980.
17 Seconds came out.
And Kaleidoscope, and there's just so many great albums that would be so influential to goth music forever.
Yeah.
And they came out in the same year, in the same 12 months. That's crazy to me.
Well, and part of why I love this album so much is I like 17 Seconds a lot. That's a really good album. But I feel like The Cure is just kind of touching on what goth is going to be when they get to 17 Seconds. Yeah. And I feel like this album, for its year, is really ahead of its time.
I do agree with that. It is very ahead of its time. What I say in terms of goth music, yes and no. Okay, this wasn't necessarily the darkest album. This wasn't necessarily the moodiest album.
No, it's not, but it's moving towards that direction. And although 17 Seconds is perhaps darker than this album, it's not as well produced, I think.
Yeah, but remember when we did 7 Seconds? It's hard to argue with 7 Seconds because that's like one of my favorite albums.
Well, I like it too a lot of the Gothic trilogy. That it's my second favorite album of the trilogy.
That's my favorite. So, yeah, I mean that's the one that I always put on. But I can see what you're saying here. That 17 Seconds in its own way, they're both. I don't know. Here's my argument: is that they're both influential in different ways, right? So, The Cure had that extremely dark, atmospheric sound that a lot of goth music and a lot of goth bands, especially today, copy.
Yeah.
Whereas this was more geared towards a lot of bands that would be influenced by Siouxsie and the Banshees and the Christine songs and the pop songs.
Yeah.
And it kind of ushered in that era of being able to do accessibility and have maybe a slightly darker album.
Well, it kind of, for me, I guess, it's influential in the sense that I feel like it sets the stage for dark wave to kind of happen.
Really?
Yeah. Because I feel like Floodland probably wouldn't have happened if this album didn't. There's some chord progressions that are eerily similar.
Well, we already talked about Andrew Eldridge and stuff, but yeah, I can see what you're saying. I don't know. I just have a hard time saying that this is the most influential goth album.
I'm not saying it's the most.
Well,
I'm just saying for 1980, this is a very influential album.
Yeah, I think almost its association with gothic music is more associated with the fact that later they became the goth female band, or at least female fronted band. So I feel like a lot of people associate it with that. Outside of the history of Siouxsie and the Banshees, I just feel like this is a really good experimental punk album, and it's you can say post-punk or anything like that.
I think it's a little more post-punk than punk.
Yeah, well obviously, yeah. But it's a really good post-punk album. But I don't know if outside of that, if it's the best gothic album. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm not saying that it's a gothic album. I just feel like it sets the stage for it, and much more so than a lot of other proto-goth albums do in 1980.
Yeah. Okay, I can see your point.
So that's pretty much the only point I'm making with this.
Okay. At least we got it across. If you have a chance to listen to Kaleidoscope and you haven't heard it, Okay, first of all, I'd be surprised if you hadn't heard at least a few songs on here and you're familiar with Siouxsie and the Banshees. But just give it a shot. This is a great album.
Definitely listen to it.
Yeah, like I said, I just don't like the latter half of the album, but that's my opinion. Robert likes it for some reason. No,
I just like Red Light.
Okay. But yeah, I think none of the songs are really bad. Just the songs that aren't the greatest, it just pales in comparison to what's on here, because there's some songs that literally sound like they could have been recorded yesterday. Yeah. That they're so modern and they're so out there. And the fact that they didn't limit themselves, of course the drum machine sounds and everything, it does have a very 80s tinge to it.
Yeah, but so does the stuff that's coming out today.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. So give it a listen if you haven't heard it. I really, really, really recommend it.
Yeah, chances are you like drum machines.
Yeah, it's probably true if you're listening to any music today. So that's Kaleidoscope.
All right, before we get into Juju, I just wanted to briefly mention that on Kaleidoscope, little known fact, another Sex Pistols tie-in here, Steve Jones actually played guitar on that record.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if we get those shirts made, I think we have to add Steve Jones to them too.
So we got Steve Jones and Sid Vicious, just round t-shirts that say Siouxsie and the Banshees. Yep. Okay, well, let's move on to Juju. I mean, this is still one of the albums.
This is the album that everybody remembers, or one of them.
Released in 1981, yet another just a year later. And this is where many people decide that they really started with their gothic rock tone, and very definitely.
Yeah, John McGeoch's guitar on this album is very like gothic guitar, lots of effects.
Yeah.
Very processed kind of sound. And Siouxsie's vocal delivery on this album is just really kind of like the epitome of what's going to be the Siouxsie and the Banshees vocal sound.
Yeah, it feels like they really had discovered their own unique sound at this point, where the other albums do feel like experiments. You know, Kaleidoscope feels like an experiment. Like
a very fun one.
Yeah, exactly. The Scream and Joint Hands, they're very similar, but not the most ambitious albums.
Yeah.
Kaleidoscope was an ambitious one. It was experimental.
Very ambitious. I think it paid off.
Oh, yeah, totally. And then this one pushes that kind of experimental nature into an even darker and more definite place.
Yeah. And does it with more commercial success.
Yeah. So, of course, the song is on this album. Spellbound. Right it off, kicks off the album. I mean, I really would question if most goth people out there, or at least people who are more into like traditional gothic rock sound, didn't know pretty much all the lyrics to the song.
Well, I mean, just a testament to that is the fact that American Horror Story just used Spellbound for one of their episodes, so now everybody knows Spellbound.
Oh, great. Okay, yeah, it's gonna be on all this stuff. It's gonna be on YouTube. You know,
yep.
Like if American Horror Story sent you here, something. You also have Arabian Nights, which is a very, very good song. I know that you're not extremely partial to it.
I'm not. It's not a bad song. It's just not my favorite song on the album.
Damn right, it's not a bad song. It's a great song.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
I love this song so much.
What did you say before the podcast?
Okay, I'll say this. I will say this, okay? I was not the biggest fan of the song initially. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was just the way it's sung, or I don't know. I just kind of had a weird sort of relationship with the song. But all of a sudden, I love this song. I love Arabian Nights. And you know, the I heard a rumor. I just love.
It's like a shitty girlfriend that just grows on you.
Look, it's not a bad song. Okay, it's really good. It really is good.
I would say it's really good. It's decent.
No, it's good.
Okay.
It's single. People love it. It probably has like 1 billion views on some site wherever you can watch it. I don't know, but it's just a really, really good single to me. And like I said, I don't know why I never really connected with it initially. You know, like when I first heard this album, but all of a sudden it just clicked, and I just really enjoy it.
Yeah, I don't know.
I guess it's the people who, you know, actually are musically inclined, you know, can understand it better.
That must be what it is.
Yeah, so
it couldn't be, you know, like
it can be different tastes.
I was gonna say something very rude, so we'll have to edit this portion out.
Good thing you did. Okay. But then you have a ton of really, really good songs. So not only do you have obviously 2 of the big singles, Spellbound and Arabian Nights, but you also have Into the Light, which is great.
Oh, Into the Light is such a good song.
You also have Halloween, which is...
Halloween's great.
Of course.
Monitor is really good.
Man, okay. I don't understand how this song is so timeless sounding. Spellbound, okay, as much as I love the song, because it uses 12-string guitar and the way it's composed, it sounds very, very 80s.
Yeah, I'll give it that.
But Monitor, it literally sounds like it could have been written today and been on radio. And I don't know how you do that. Like, that's crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, although Nine Inch Nails definitely not a goth band, I almost kind of could see this as something that might inspire some of their material that would come.
Yeah, I could totally see that, especially with that. It's like a kind of clean yet abrasive song.
Yeah,
it's just really, really, really good. And of course, another song's really good. Night Shift. Another one of those kind of creepy ones.
I just feel like every song in this album is so solid to me.
Wait, there's only one song I don't like. I'm gonna say it right now, and it's Voodoo Dolly.
Yeah,
it's long.
I think part of what makes it unenjoyable is how long it is.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, I don't really care about long songs. Like I said, Type 1 Egg is my favorite band.
Long songs can be good, but it works for some songs and it doesn't for others. Like, you could never take Spellbound and make it 8 minutes long. It would be boring.
Yeah, exactly. I think Voodoo Dolly, it just has some parts I don't really like, or most of the song, like the composition side, I don't really like, and it's really long, so not my favorite on the album. In fact, that's probably the only song which I'm not super partial to.
Yeah,
I've seen live performance of it, and I do tend to like the live performances better.
Yeah,
but as far as the album version, it's not my favorite. And in fact, with pretty much these amazing songs on this album, this one just sticks out for me. So
see, that's kind of how I feel about Arabian Nights.
I don't know how you don't like Arabian Nights, seriously.
Because I feel like Halloween or Monitor could have easily been a single for this album and would have been a better single, in my opinion.
I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I don't necessarily agree with that either. Like, I think, oh gosh, you could have put so many singles from this album. In fact, I think if the actually album cycles back then had been
like they are now,
yeah, like longer, or you do like a single a year or something.
Yep.
It's like you play it out until it's completely burnt out.
Yeah, you play your album until each song has become a single that you've released.
Yeah, exactly. So I think if maybe the album cycles were a little bit longer at the time, we probably would have actually gotten videos, or those would have been released as singles, at least bigger singles than they were exposed to be. Especially, I don't even think Monitor was really pushed that hard,
really,
even like live or anything like that. So I think you probably would have had that if album cycles were longer.
Yeah, but
because you don't, you have these very kind of 80s sounding singles, and that's not necessarily a bad thing here. Like Arabian Nights, Spellbound are probably the most dated songs on this album.
Yeah,
that may be because the videos associated with them and the mixes for them are very of the time. They're very double track heavy, they're very reverb heavy, they're very driving. And this is, this is 81, so this isn't super into the 80s. It's not like
no, we're just
85.
We're just getting into the 80s. We're easing in there.
Yeah, and this does have that.
But this album does not ease into the 80s.
Yeah, it kind of goes straight into it. And the one thing we haven't really been talking that much about with Siouxsie and the Banshees, and you may have noticed, is the fashion. And I kind of want to talk about the most with this one, because when they started out, they were almost like a hybrid of the punk glam sort of look, right?
Yeah, they were very Sex Pistols meets,
I almost say like David Bowie kind of look.
Yeah, I was
not in terms of sound.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I was gonna say New York Dolls.
Yeah, they had piercings, and Siouxsie had short hair, and she would do all the makeup on her face to look really crazy. Not a crazy person. It's like it would look very unique.
Mm-hmm.
But like the leather and all that stuff.
Yep.
So they kind of went with that sort of thing for first two albums, and right around the time they started doing Kaleidoscope, she was still doing the short hair, but kind of growing it out, and kind of evolving look, right? So she was kind of bouncing back and forth between the long hair, short hair, sort of post-punk, maybe like a little bit goth influenced.
Mm-hmm.
And the band was the same kind of way. Band's just a band of dudes, and they kind of just like very interesting.
Yeah.
But then when you get to Juju, you get kind of that,
There's a very consistent sound and image that goes together.
Yeah, Spellbound is probably the most famous video, right?
Yeah.
And the big hair, the black eyeliner and stuff, and just that look is what so many goth girls love about it. Just her crawling in the beginning.
Yeah, it's the very
the cradle.
Trad goth kind of look.
Yeah, exactly. And so you really start to see that here, and just everyone's been copying and pulling from that ever since.
Mm-hmm.
Even the Arabian Nights stuff, just that kind of look. And of course, Hyena, that comes out later. just cements that sort of look.
Of course.
And so many people just pull from that sort of album in that era. But this is where you start to see it. And this is why I think a lot of people will call this, their first really gothic rock album.
Yeah.
And especially because the lyrical content is a lot darker. I mean, it's just so many different reasons.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. Because Siouxsie Sioux even makes a comment that with this album that the content is much darker, and it's really kind of their first like concept album that really has dark imagery and lyrics and just image to it.
Yeah.
But it wasn't intentional at all. It was just what they were interested in and what they were feeling influenced by, and it just came out that way.
Yeah. This not to say that they didn't sort of have a distinctive look in the beginning. I just want to make that kind of clear for this one.
Yeah.
I mean, even in the video for Playground Twist, right? A song that we didn't really like that much, she still has the big kind of black hair and like the black and white look. And so you do have that distinct kind of Siouxsie look that a lot of people pull from, but it just wasn't set to the music that necessarily a lot of people connected with the look.
No, I'd agree with that. I feel like this album really kind of starts to bring in that. It's really the ushering of their sound and their image.
Yeah, I mean, you have so much other gothic music coming out around this time, and this is really where, just in the next few years, it would really, really explode.
Oh, yeah.
And they're one of the biggest contributors to that, and this album was definitely a big push for that. I mean, so many bands pull from this sound on this album that it's even hard to pinpoint where they might be getting it from, because a lot of times people will be influenced by Siouxsie and the Banshees, then a band makes a song, it sounds kind of like their guitar or use their kind of drum beats.
Yeah.
Then another band is influenced by that song and then does it from that song. So it's one of those things where it's so influential and is spread out so much that it's hard to even pinpoint all the bands that have adopted the sound.
It's like any good music, really. It just kind of spirals out from there.
Yeah. So I don't think we can recommend this album enough.
Yeah.
If
you haven't heard Juju and you're a Siouxsie and the Banshees fan, you need to immediately pay a visit to your local record store or, just get your hands on it.
Who knows? I mean, seriously, music is changing so dramatically right
now.
now.
You might buy it on cassette for all we know.
It's true. 2015, you would buy it on cassette. But just go out and listen to this one. I mean, honestly, there's not really a bad song on this album.
And if you have heard it, let's do it again.
Yeah, just go listen to it again. So it's just such a good album. In fact, I don't know if it's the best album to introduce Siouxsie and the Banshees beginners to, because even coming up, we have albums like, I'll just say Hyena. I mean, I love Hyena. And I think that album is really accessible too. The good thing about Siouxsie and the Banshees is that the albums, while similar, have very distinct differences.
No, definitely.
Kaleidoscope and Juju are very different albums, but they're similar in a way.
Yeah,
and
there are some similarities that can be drawn between the two. And I don't know which one I would recommend to a first-time Siouxsie listener.
Yeah.
I almost am tempted to say Juju, just because I feel like it's a really nice introduction for Siouxsie and the Banshees, especially now. Now I'm not sure if the question becomes, is this the record to introduce to someone who's never heard Siouxsie and the Banshees or someone who's never heard goth music?
That's a very good question.
Because if it's someone who's never heard goth music, I would definitely say Juju. But I'd go back and forth if it's just someone who's never heard Siouxsie and the Banshees.
Either way, I think I'm going to go with Juju just because this album's so solid. It's not really any bad songs on this album. Like I said, I mean, I'm not really fond of the last song, but
yeah,
it's such a strong album. And we're actually going to get to, obviously, their next group of albums, which are amazing inside the next episode. But as far as these first four, I think if you're kind of curious about this band, or you maybe have only heard of greatest hits and you kind of want to hear an album that blows your mind, I think Juju's the one to go with.
Yeah, because I would agree with that statement.
It's not only going to tell you
what Siouxsie and the Banshees are about, but it's really going to do it well. It's the first album I feel like that really does it well.
Yeah, and it's going to influence a whole bunch of people. It's going to be probably one of their most popular, maybe top 3 albums. Most people will usually vote it at one. If they're not voting, another album is probably going to be on our next episode.
And that's not to say that the last 3 albums weren't good.
Yeah.
It's just this really starts to solidify their sound.
Yeah. It was a very hard thing to put into words exactly how we felt about this, and Siouxsie and the Banshees is a hard band to talk about, honestly, because they switch everything around so much, and we're gonna see that coming up.
Well, and I kind of feel like they're a lot like The Cure, and I kind of feel like that's why these episodes about Siouxsie and the Banshees are probably going to feel very similar to our Cure episodes.
Yeah. That's very true. They just incorporate different things inside of each album and that make it distinct, or at least you have certain sections of it that are very distinct. So
and they have very distinct eras.
Yeah, exactly. So on our next episode of Siouxsie and the Banshees Part 2, we're going to cover the next 4 albums, and we might cover some of the rare oddities and singles that come out, because
some of them are
there's just
good.
some weird trivia and stuff with the next few albums, but look forward to that the next time we do Siouxsie and the Banshees, but maybe a few episodes until then.
Yep.
And I hope you've enjoyed this episode of GothCast.
Yeah, and very quickly, we just wanted to plug our social media.
Like we do every episode.
Yep. If you guys have Instagram, you can find us at GothCast. It's just simply GothCast, all lowercase. If you guys have Facebook, we're on there too. We have a website, gothcastradio.com. That's probably the easiest place to find all of our content.
Yeah.
Everything's located on there. It's just gothcastradio.com, no www. For whatever reason, the World Wide Web has eradicated that.
Yeah. So.
And we also have a YouTube channel, GothCast Space Video. So feel free to check out any of that content. I'm sure if you guys like this podcast, you'll definitely like our other content as well.
Yeah, and if you want to leave iTunes reviews, we always like those.
Yeah, and if you like this episode, if you haven't already, or it's your first time hearing us, subscribe. I think you'll like what you'll hear to come.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in. I have been Dr. Sanders. Well, I mean, I'm still Dr. Sanders, but I will continue to be Dr. Sanders.
And you have been Dr. Sanders.
I have been. Currently, throughout this whole episode, I've been Dr. Sanders.
And have been Robbie Gore.
All right. See you next time on GothCast. Stay spooky.